Have you ever made a perfect plan? One of those beautiful roadmaps to success where every little detail is worked out, only to watch it just completely fall apart when it hits the real world? It's a tough feeling, and trust me, it doesn't just happen to us. It happens to massive companies too. So today, we're going to dive into the story of a company called Fresh Foods and see exactly how their perfect plan shattered on impact.
And this is the million-dollar question. Well, the $80,000 question, I guess. How does a plan that promises a really healthy six-figure profit just fizzle out, losing two-thirds of its value? The answer isn't just about a bit of bad luck. No. This is a masterclass in what happens when a spreadsheet meets reality. So where did it all go so wrong?
All right, so let's meet our case study. Fresh Foods Processing Ltd. Now, this isn't some small startup working out of a garage. These guys are a big deal. They're a nationwide producer with a factory cranking out packaged foods that end up in supermarkets all across the country. They're established, they're experienced, and they had a plan.
To really get why things went off the rails, we first have to appreciate the blueprint. We've got to look at the plan that Fresh Foods laid out for themselves at the start of the year. They're ambitious and what looked like a perfect annual budget.
So what even is a budget? It's not just some boring document filled with numbers. A better way to think about it is like a company's financial roadmap for the year. Or you could even call it a promise the company makes to itself. It's the one thing that's supposed to guide every single decision they make.
And that promise, well, that started off really strong. The target was $500,000 in sales. That is a confident, ambitious number, and it set a super optimistic tone for the whole year. So far, so good, right? Okay, so to make that $500,000 sales goal happen, they calculated that their production costs would land right around $300,000. The math seems to check out. On paper, this plan looks solid, totally reasonable.
And here it is, the number that really matters, the grand prize at the end of the road. They projected a profit of $120,000. I mean, that's a fantastic result for a year's work, all neatly calculated and accounted for.
The math was simple. The path looked totally clear. You can almost feel the confidence just jumping off the page, can't you? This was supposed to be their treasure map to a super profitable year. Which, of course, brings us to that famous last question. What could possibly go wrong? All right, let's fast forward 12 months. The year's over. An accountant sits down, pulls out that perfect plan, and puts it right next to the actual messy results. This is that moment of truth, when the flawless blueprint gets a big dose of reality.
And boom, the whole story is laid bare right here. Just look at the sales. They missed their target by 50 grand. Okay, that's a hit for sure, but it's not a total catastrophe. But then you look at the next line. Costs didn't come in at 300,000. They exploded to 380,000. So you've got less money coming in and way more money going out. The results, well, you can see it. The profit just completely fell off a cliff.
Wow, this chart just says it all, doesn't it? That tall bar on the left, that was the dream. And that tiny little bar on the right, that's the brutal reality. They didn't just miss their target. They brought in only 1/3 of the profit they had planned for. Ouch. This is the moment every single manager dreads. Staring at a result like this and having to ask that big, simple question. So, what on earth happened?
All right, time for the investigation. We need to unpack the variance. That's just the fancy business term for the gap between the plan and what actually happened. And it turns out there were three main culprits that completely derailed the Fresh Foods budget. Here they are, the three main suspects we're going to investigate. First, there was an unexpected price spike. Second, some real problems on the factory floor. And third, a tough battle out in the marketplace. Let's break them down, one by one.
So the biggest piece of this profit puzzle came from the costs. They planned for 300 grand, but they ended up spending a whopping 380,000. An $80,000 overrun is a massive blow to any budget. But why?
Well, part of that $80,000 problem came from outside their factory walls. The prices for their raw materials, the basic ingredients for everything they make, they just spiked, completely out of the blue. This is a classic risk, the kind of market storm that can hit any business without any warning. But they couldn't just blame the market. The investigation also found some pretty serious problems inside their own factory. Turns out, inefficiencies on the production line meant they were wasting time and materials. This internal issue basically poured gasoline on the fire of those external price spikes, pushing their costs up even higher. So at the exact same time their costs were exploding, their revenue was shrinking. They had planned for $500,000 in sales, but they only managed to bring in $450,000. That's a $50,000 hole in the top line of their budget.
And the reason for that sales miss? Well, simply put, the supermarket shelves just got a whole lot more crowded. Increased competition meant that other brands were fighting for the same shoppers' attention, which made it so much harder for Fresh Foods to hit that ambitious sales target. Okay, so what's the big takeaway from Fresh Foods' terrible year? Well, their story has a really powerful lesson for anyone trying to stick to a plan, whether it's for a business or just for yourself. And it's this: a budget is not the finish line. It's just the starting line.
It all boils down to a few key lessons here. A budget is just a plan, a guess. It's not a guarantee, because reality will always find a way to challenge your plan. And that's exactly why you can't just set it and forget it. You've got to constantly monitor how you're doing. But even more important is digging into the why behind the numbers. As Fresh Foods learned the hard way, cost control isn't something you do once a year. It's an active, daily thing.
And the good news is that the team at Fresh Foods seems to have learned this lesson. There's a note in the case study that says it all. Their management is now totally focused on improving cost control and planning. They're finally ready to learn from this failure and build a better system.
Ultimately, the Fresh Foods story is a great reminder that any plan, no matter how detailed or confident it looks, is really just an educated guess about the future. And that leaves us with one last, really crucial question to think about. Is your business, or maybe even your own personal plan, truly prepared to handle reality?